In a silent room at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, Dr. Isabel Navarro watched the monitors in disbelief. The brain waves of two participants, separated by specially designed metal walls to block any known form of communication, pulsed in perfect synchrony. It wasn't coincidence. It was the first documented scientific evidence of the existence of telepathy. The phenomenon she observed transcended all conventional theories about consciousness and communication. As a neuroscientist trained in the traditional materialist school, Isabel had always approached her experiments with methodical skepticism. But now, faced with irrefutable data, she found herself forced to question everything she thought she knew about the human mind. The discovery wasn't just about thought transmission. It was about something much deeper. What Isabel and her team had found suggested the existence of what quantum physicist David Bohm called the implicate order, a dimension of reality where everything is fundamentally interconnected. This order, which transcends conventional spacetime, could explain not only telepathy, but also phenomena such as the synchronicity described by Carl Jung and the mystical experiences reported by different spiritual traditions throughout history. The experiment began as an investigation into electromagnetic brain fields, inspired by the pioneering work of Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum, a Mexican neuroscientist who decades earlier had conducted similar studies. Grinberg had proposed the existence of a neuronal matrix, a field of consciousness shared by all human beings. His mysterious disappearance in 1994 had been attributed to an accident, but now Isabel was beginning to suspect there was something more sinister behind that event. The experiment participants were randomly selected, with no history of psychic abilities or special training. Yet, after a few synchronization sessions, they began to demonstrate increasing levels of non-verbal communication. Even more surprising was that this ability seemed to persist even after they left the laboratory, as if something fundamental in their brains had been permanently altered. The implication was clear. Telepathy was not a supernatural gift reserved for a chosen few, but a latent capacity in all human beings. It was as if we had spent millennia with a dormant sensory organ, and now finally we were discovering how to activate it. The brainwave recordings revealed fascinating patterns. During moments of successful telepathic communication, participants entered a state similar to deep meditation, with a predominance of theta and gamma waves. This state had been described by mystics and meditators throughout history as a moment of union with the whole, or dissolution of the ego. Isabel recalled the words of neuroscientist Francisco Varela, who had proposed that consciousness was not something confined to the individual brain, but an emergent phenomenon of the interaction between different nervous systems. Telepathy, viewed from this perspective, would not be something supernatural, but simply a deeper level of neural communication that had always existed, just waiting to be recognized and developed. As the experiments progressed, participants began to report increasingly extraordinary experiences. Not only could they transmit simple thoughts or mental images, but they began to access each other's memories and emotions. It was as if the barriers separating individual consciousnesses were gradually dissolving. Dr. Navarro kept a detailed diary of all sessions, documenting not only the scientific data, but also the personal transformations she observed in the participants. Many reported profound changes in their daily lives, greater empathy, heightened intuition, a sense of connection with others even at a distance. It was during the analysis of these reports that Isabel began to perceive the true implications of her discovery. If telepathy was a natural ability that could be developed through proper training, it meant that the entire structure of human society could be transformed. A world where people could communicate directly, mind to mind, would be radically different from what we know. The implications were simultaneously inspiring and disturbing. On one hand, the possibility of true empathy and mutual understanding could lead to an unprecedented level of cooperation and social harmony. On the other hand, in a society built on secrets and manipulation, total transparency could cause systemic collapse. Isabel didn't know yet, but her discoveries had already caught the attention of powerful people. While she contemplated the philosophical and social ramifications of her work, hidden forces were moving in the shadows, determined to keep the telepathic code out of the public eye. The truth about telepathy was about to prove much more dangerous than anyone could imagine, and Isabel Navarro, the scientist who had always sought objective answers, was about to find herself at the center of a conspiracy that spanned millennia of human history. The laboratory was silent that night when Isabel decided to review the experiment data one more time. As she studied the brainwave patterns on the computer screen, a theory began to take shape in her mind. A theory that could explain not just telepathy, but the entire nature of human consciousness. What she was observing was not simply a transmission of signals between two brains, but something much more fundamental. Evidence that human minds existed within a unified field of information, something that neuroscientist Carl Pribram had called the holographic paradigm. Just as each fragment of a hologram contains the information of the whole, each individual mind seemed to have potential access to the entire collective consciousness. This idea resonated deeply with the work of physicist David Bohm, who proposed that the universe operates as an undivided wholeness where everything is fundamentally interconnected at a level he called the implicate order. Telepathy, viewed from this perspective, would not be a transmission of information through space, but direct access to this underlying unified field. The experiment data showed that during moments of successful telepathic communication, the participants' brains exhibited a phenomenon known as quantum coherence, a state where distant particles begin to behave as if they were one. It was as if their minds were tuning into a fundamental frequency of the universe. Isabel remembered the words of the Indian mystic Sri Aurobindo, who decades earlier had described the evolution of human consciousness as a natural process of awakening to increasingly higher levels of perception and connection. Telepathy in this context would not be an anomaly, but a natural evolutionary step in the development of the human species. As she deepened her analysis, Isabel began to notice subtle patterns in the data that had escaped her initial attention. Participants who demonstrated greater ease with telepathic communication also showed elevated levels of activity in the insular cortex, a region of the brain associated with bodily awareness and empathy. It was as if the ability to feel one's own body more deeply was directly related to the ability to connect with other minds. This discovery aligned perfectly with neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's observations about the embodied nature of consciousness. The mind was not just in the brain, but distributed throughout the body, and telepathy seemed to depend on this mind-body integration to function properly. The experiment participants often reported that before they could establish telepathic connection, they needed to enter a state of deep relaxation and bodily presence. This state was remarkably similar to that described by mindfulness meditation practitioners, suggesting a connection between ancient contemplative practices and the development of telepathic abilities. As Isabel deepened her understanding of the holographic matrix, she began to realize that what she had discovered was not just a new means of communication, but a key to understanding the very nature of reality. If human minds were truly interconnected at a fundamental level, it meant that our perception of separation was an illusion, albeit a necessary illusion for the functioning of individual consciousness. This understanding brought with it profound ethical implications. In a universe where all minds are interconnected, each thought and action affects the whole in subtle but significant ways. The responsibility for our own mental and emotional frequencies took on a new dimension of importance. It was in this moment of clarity that Isabel heard footsteps in the hallway. It was late at night, and the laboratory should have been empty. Her heart raced when she realized she was no longer alone. Quickly, she began backing up the data to an external drive, guided by an urgent intuition that she needed to protect her discoveries. The footsteps were approaching, and with them came a sense of imminent danger that she couldn't rationally explain. It was as if her own connection to the holographic matrix was trying to alert her. Without thinking twice, Isabel deleted the original files from the computer, tucked the drive into her bag, and began preparing to leave. As she gathered her things, her mind returned to Jacobo Grinberg's writings about the neuronal matrix. He Two had come close to scientifically proving the existence of a unified field of consciousness, and his disappearance had never been adequately explained. Were there forces interested in keeping this knowledge hidden? The implications of her discoveries began to unfold in her mind like an infinite skein. If telepathy was real and could be developed, it meant that all power systems based on information control were threatened. A telepathic humanity would be impossible to control through manipulation and disinformation. The footsteps were now very close. Isabel turned off the computer and headed for the laboratory's back exit, aware that she was about to embark on a journey of no return. The holographic matrix had revealed its secrets to her, but this knowledge came with a price she didn't yet fully understand. As she walked quickly down the dark corridor, Isabel reflected on how an apparently innocent scientific discovery had transformed into something much larger. Telepathy wasn't just a paranormal curiosity, it was a key to the next stage of human evolution, and some people would do anything to prevent that key from being shared with the world. The small cafe in the center of Mexico City was almost empty when Isabel met Juan Velázquez, a former student of Jacobo Grinberg who had spent the last decades investigating his mentor's disappearance. The words he shared that afternoon forever changed her understanding of what was at stake. "Telepathy is not a new discovery, Dr. Navarro," Juan explained in a low voice, his eyes constantly checking the other tables. "It's ancient knowledge that has been systematically suppressed throughout history. What you found in your laboratory is just the tip of a much deeper and much more dangerous iceberg." Juan proceeded to reveal a story that seemed straight out of a conspiracy novel, except that each element could be verified through historical documents and archaeological evidence. Ancient civilizations, from the Maya to the Egyptians, possessed initiation schools where the development of telepathy was a fundamental part of spiritual training. These traditions were gradually forced underground by successive waves of persecution, but the knowledge was never completely lost. It was preserved by secret groups who passed it down from generation to generation, always aware of the danger it posed to established power structures. Professor Grinberg didn't disappear by accident, Juan continued. He was about to publish conclusive evidence about the neuronal matrix. But there are people, powerful organizations, who have an interest in keeping humanity disconnected from its true capabilities. Isabel felt a shiver run down her spine as she recognized parallels between Grinberg's story and her own current situation. The mysterious events in her laboratory, the disappearing files, the constant feeling of being watched. Everything was beginning to make a terrible sense. But why? Why would someone go to such lengths to suppress this knowledge? The answer, according to Juan, lay in the profound implications of widespread telepathy for existing power structures. A telepathic population would be virtually impossible to manipulate through propaganda or disinformation. Corporate secrets, political manipulations, covert operations, all of this would become unfeasible in a world where people could read minds. "But there's something even deeper at play," Juan whispered, leaning in closer. "Telepathy is just the first step. The true potential of the human mind goes far beyond simple communication. The ancient masters spoke of capabilities that today we would consider impossible. Remote healing, precognition, even the ability to influence matter itself through thought." Isabel remembered the anomalous data she had observed in some of her experiments, phenomena she had dismissed as impossible, but which now began to make sense in a new light. Some participants had demonstrated capabilities that went beyond simple mental communication, as if telepathy were just the gateway to a much broader spectrum of latent abilities. Juan then revealed the existence of an international network of researchers, mystics, and activists who had been working for decades to bring this knowledge to light. They called themselves the Guardians of the Telepathic Code, and their work had cost many lives over the years. But now, with the advancement of technology and humanity's growing collective consciousness, they believed the moment for the final revelation was near. "Your discoveries are no coincidence, Dr. Navarro," Juan explained. "You were guided here by forces you don't yet fully understand. What happens now depends entirely on your choice." Isabel realized she was at a crossroads. She could try to return to her normal life, pretend she had never discovered what she had. But something inside her knew that was no longer possible. Or she could accept the implicit invitation in Juan's words and dive deeper down the rabbit hole, no matter where it led her. The afternoon sun was beginning to set over Mexico City, casting long shadows through the cafe windows. Isabel looked at her reflection in the glass and saw a different woman from the one who had started this journey. The skeptical scientist had given way to someone who was beginning to understand that reality was far vaster and more mysterious than she had ever imagined. "What exactly do you want from me?" she finally asked. Juan smiled as if he had been waiting for this question. "We want you to continue your work, but now with full awareness of what's at stake. Your experiments can provide the scientific proof. We need to legitimize this knowledge in the eyes of the modern world. But more important than that, we need your help to protect and disseminate this knowledge before it's too late." He then proceeded to explain how different power groups were in a silent race to develop and control telepathy. Governments, corporations, and secret organizations were investing billions in clandestine research, not for the benefit of humanity, but to increase their control over it. "The question is no longer whether telepathy will be developed," Juan concluded, "but who will control it and for what purposes, and time is running out." As she absorbed these revelations, Isabel felt the weight of responsibility grow on her shoulders. Her scientific discovery had transformed into something much larger, a battle for the very nature of human consciousness and the future of civilization. The Buddhist monastery in the mountains of Oaxaca seemed to exist in another temporal dimension. There, under the guidance of masters who had preserved ancient traditions of mental development, Isabel began to understand the true nature of the telepathic code. "The mind is not confined to the brain," explained Master Chen, a monk who combined knowledge of neuroscience with millennia-old meditation practices. "It is like a field that extends far beyond the limits of the physical body, what you scientists call telepathy. We call recognition of the true nature of the mind." In the following weeks, Isabel underwent an intense training program that combined advanced meditative practices with specific exercises for developing extrasensory perception. The process was simultaneously fascinating and challenging, as it required her to abandon many of her mental conditionings. The exercises began with basic mindfulness practices, focusing on breathing and body awareness. They gradually progressed to more subtle states of consciousness, where the boundaries between self and other began to dissolve. It was in these states that the first genuine experiences of telepathy occurred. "The secret is not in transmitting thoughts," explained Master Chen, "but in recognizing that at a deeper level all minds are already connected. Telepathy is simply the act of tuning into that existing connection." Isabel discovered that the process was very similar to what she had observed in her laboratory experiments, but now she was experiencing it firsthand. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced, an expansion of consciousness that transcended the normal limitations of space and time. During a particularly deep session, she had an experience that fundamentally changed her understanding of reality. While meditating in the monastery garden, her consciousness seemed to expand to encompass the entire mountain. She could feel every plant, every insect, every current of air, not as separate objects, but as aspects of a single integrated consciousness. It was at this moment that she understood the true meaning of the telepathic code. It wasn't just a method of mental communication, but a key to awakening latent capacities that would allow humanity to transcend its current limitations and evolve to a new level of existence. Master Chen explained that these capabilities were not supernatural, but natural, intrinsic aspects of human consciousness that had been dormant due to social conditioning and the overstimulation of modern life. The training wasn't creating anything new, just removing the blocks that prevented the flourishing of these innate abilities. "But why were these capabilities suppressed?" Isabel asked during one of their nightly conversations. "Because an awakened humanity is impossible to control," the master replied. "The current system of power depends on the fragmentation of human consciousness. When people recognize their true interconnected nature, the entire edifice of manipulation and control begins to crumble." Isabel began to keep a detailed diary of her experiences, documenting not only the telepathic phenomena, but also other abilities that were beginning to manifest: precognition, clairvoyance, remote healing. Each new ability seemed to emerge naturally from the expansion of consciousness, like flowers blooming with the arrival of spring. But the most surprising aspect was how these experiences were transforming her understanding of science itself. The phenomena she was experiencing didn't contradict scientific principles. In fact, they pointed to a deeper and more comprehensive science, one that could unify the insights of ancient traditions with the most recent discoveries in quantum physics and neuroscience. One night, while observing the stars from the top of the mountain, Isabel had a revelation that tied all the pieces of the puzzle together. The telepathic code wasn't just a set of techniques or secret knowledge, it was a map for the next stage of human evolution. And this evolution wasn't optional. It was a biological and spiritual imperative that could no longer be denied or suppressed. The first indication that something was wrong came through a dream. Isabel woke up in the middle of the night with crystal clarity. She was no longer safe in the monastery. Her newly developed abilities confirmed the intuition. There were people approaching, and their intentions were not friendly. Master Chen was already waiting for her when she arrived at the main temple. "They've finally found us," he said with surprising calmness. "You need to leave immediately. There's a safe place prepared for you in Mexico City." As she gathered her essential belongings, including the diary with her notes, Isabel realized she was entering a new phase of her journey. The period of protected learning had ended. Now she would need to apply her skills in the real world, facing those who wanted to keep the telepathic code in the shadows. The journey back to the city was a lesson in constant vigilance. Isabel discovered that she could use her new abilities to detect potential threats before they materialized. Telepathy, she realized, was as much a survival tool as it was a means of communication. Her destination was a discreet apartment in the Coyoacan neighborhood, maintained by a cell of the Guardians of the Code. There she met other researchers, and mystics who, like her, had become targets because of their discoveries. Each had their own story of persecution and escape, but they all shared the same conviction. The knowledge they possessed needed to be preserved and shared, no matter the cost. It was through these new allies that Isabel began to understand the true extent of the conspiracy they faced. It wasn't just a single group or organization, but a complex network of interests that benefited from keeping humanity in a state of limited consciousness. "The control of human consciousness is the biggest business in the world," explained Maria, a former executive of a major media corporation who had joined the Guardians after discovering the secret mental manipulation programs in her company. Billions are spent every year on research on how to influence and limit human perception. Natural telepathy is their greatest threat because it makes these manipulations impossible. Isabel spent days studying documents and reports detailing decades of systematic suppression of research on psychic abilities, promising experiments mysteriously defunded, researchers discredited or silenced, evidence lost or destroyed. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Even more disturbing was discovering how technologies based on telepathic principles were already being developed in secret laboratories, not for the benefit of humanity, but as tools of control and surveillance. The race wasn't to prevent the development of telepathy, but to ensure that it remained in the hands of a few. "They know they can't indefinitely prevent the awakening of human consciousness," explained another member of the group, a physicist, who had worked on secret government projects. "The plan now is to try to control and direct this awakening through technological interfaces that can be monitored and manipulated." Isabel understood that she was in the middle of a silent war for the future of human consciousness. On one side, those who wanted to awaken and share the natural capacities of the human mind. On the other, powerful forces that intended to channel and control these capacities through technology and manipulation. The danger was real and immediate. In the weeks that followed, 2 members of the group disappeared without a trace. Others reported attempts to break into their homes and computers. The sense of siege was increasing, but along with the danger came a growing clarity about what needed to be done. The telepathic code could not remain in the shadows, protected by a few. It needed to be shared widely in a way that could not be controlled or suppressed. The only way to protect this knowledge is to make it public, Isabel declared during a strategic meeting, not through scientific papers or official channels that can be blocked, but directly from mind to mind, person to person. It was a bold and dangerous proposal. It would mean exposing not only the knowledge, but also those who possessed it. However, the more Isabel reflected on the situation, the more convinced she became that there was no other choice. The evolution of human consciousness had reached a critical point. The forces trying to control it were powerful, but not more powerful than humanity's natural impulse to awaken and evolve. The true power of the telepathic code wasn't in its potential for communication or expanded perception, but in its ability to catalyze a fundamental transformation in collective consciousness. The question now was how to initiate this transformation before it was too late. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, Isabel sat in front of her laptop and began to write. The document she was preparing wasn't a traditional scientific paper, but something much more radical. A complete manual for developing natural telepathy, combining her scientific discoveries with the ancient teachings she had received. Knowledge wants to be free, she wrote in the introduction. The capabilities you are about to awaken are not special gifts or supernatural powers. They are natural aspects of human consciousness that have been suppressed and forgotten. This guide is an invitation to rediscover your true nature. The manual began with basic exercises in meditation and body awareness, gradually progressing to more advanced techniques for telepathic development. Isabel took care to present everything in a clear and accessible way, supported by both scientific evidence and traditional wisdom. But more important than the techniques themselves was the paradigm shift that the manual proposed. Isabel dedicated several sections to explaining how telepathy was not a violation of natural laws, but an expression of them at a deeper level. She used analogies from quantum physics and field theory to demonstrate how mental interconnection was not only possible, but fundamental to the nature of reality. The separation between minds is an illusion, she wrote, as illusory as the apparent solidity of matter when observed at the quantum level. What we call telepathy is simply the conscious recognition of a connection that has always existed. As she worked on the manual, Isabel realized that she was doing much more than sharing techniques. She was planting the seeds of a revolution in human consciousness. Each person who developed their natural telepathic abilities would become a catalyst for the awakening of others, creating a chain reaction that could not be stopped. The guardians of the code helped to review and refine the document, contributing insights from their own traditions and experiences. The final result was a comprehensive guide that could function both as an introduction for beginners and as an advanced manual for experienced practitioners. But the crucial question remained: how to distribute this knowledge in a way that could not be suppressed or controlled. The internet was under constant surveillance, and any attempt at conventional publication would be quickly blocked. The answer came through a series of synchronized dreams that several members of the group had on the same night. The message was clear. The knowledge needed to be transmitted not just through written words, but through a living network of connected minds. Isabel and the Guardians developed a bold plan. The manual would be distributed through multiple channels, simultaneously: internet, digital samizdat, personal networks. But this would be just the beginning. The real work would be done through face-to-face practice groups, where people could develop their telepathic abilities in a safe and supportive environment. Each person who awakens their natural capabilities will become a node in a living network of consciousness, Isabel explained during a strategic meeting. Once enough people are connected, the knowledge will become impossible to suppress. The plan was not without risks. Those who opposed the dissemination of the telepathic code would certainly react with force, but the time for hesitation had passed. Humanity was ready to take the next step in its evolution, and no force could permanently prevent this advancement. The impact was immediate and beyond the most optimistic expectations. Within weeks after the release of the manual, practice groups began to form spontaneously in different parts of the world. People were rediscovering their natural telepathic abilities and, more importantly, were connecting with each other at a deeper level than they had ever experienced. Isabel observed the phenomenon with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The transformations that the development of telepathy provoked in people were profound and irreversible. Relationships were redefined as people became incapable of maintaining social masks or hiding their true intentions. Organizations and institutions began to transform as telepathic transparency made it impossible to maintain the old power structures based on secrecy and manipulation. "It's as if we're witnessing the birth of a new species," commented one of the Guardians during an emergency meeting. "Homo telepathicus, the next step in human evolution." But with the transformation also came resistance. Corporations began to implement anti-telepathic policies. Governments rushed to create legislation regulating the use of unauthorized mental communication, and disinformation campaigns tried to discredit the movement as a form of mass hysteria. The most concerning response came in the form of a new technology, a device that promised to block natural telepathy while offering a controlled and monitored version of augmented mental communication. It was exactly what the Guardians feared most, an attempt to co-opt and control the natural awakening of human consciousness. Isabel knew they had reached a critical point. The battle now was no longer for control of knowledge, but for the very future of human evolution. On one side, the natural and organic development of telepathic abilities. On the other, a technologically mediated and controlled version of these same abilities. On a clear autumn morning, exactly 1 year after the release of the manual, Isabel climbed to the top of an ancient Mayan pyramid in Palenque. The location had not been chosen by chance. It was one of the focal points of the ancient telepathic network that the Mayans had established centuries before. Around her, hundreds of people gathered in concentric circles, their minds tuned to a common frequency. They weren't just local practitioners. Through the telepathic network they had developed, thousands of other groups around the world were connected simultaneously. What was about to happen wasn't just a demonstration of mass telepathy. It was a declaration of independence of human consciousness. Through the global telepathic network they had created, they would share not just thoughts or emotions, but a complete vision of a new mode of existence. The telepathic code was never just about communication, Isabel mentally transmitted to the network. It's about remembering our true nature as interconnected, conscious beings. It's about awakening to a greater reality that has always existed, but that we forgot. The response was a wave of understanding and acceptance that reverberated through the global telepathic network. At that moment, something fundamental changed in the collective consciousness of humanity. The veil of separation began to dissolve, and a new form of existence began to emerge. The future was still uncertain. The transition to a telepathic humanity would bring challenges and transformations that no one could fully predict. But one thing was clear. There was no turning back. The telepathic code had been released, and with it the potential for a conscious evolution of the human species. As the sun set over Palenque, Isabel felt a deep peace. Her personal journey, from skeptical scientist to guardian of ancient knowledge, had been just part of a much larger transformation. The real work was just beginning, but now it would be carried out not by isolated individuals, but by an awakened and connected humanity, ready to take the next step in its conscious evolution.